Good evening, everyone. And again, I would like to say that the speaker is not an authority. This is very important to understand. I'm not here to convince you of anything, that you should accept what I'm saying, but rather we're exploring together as Sangha, as spiritual friends, this very universal problem of fear. We can all relate to it, and that's why I like to speak about it. We can all relate to fear. Everyone experiences fear. Not only physical fear, but mental, psychological fear. And monks are not exempt from this, because monks are human beings too. As long as we have this human mind, we will experience fear. So we're exploring together. This is important, right? So there's no authority. Exploring together, so we can have a better understanding of it. And of course, this is why the practice of mindfulness is so important. Just listening to talks is really a waste of time. Because without mindfulness, the mind will always create fear. Just like it will always create some form of craving, expectation, wanting, desire. Because really, it is thinking itself that it is creating fear. So we'll explore this. Now basically, there are two types of fear: physical fear and mental, psychological fear. Physical fear is something more easy to understand, because it's a natural, intuitive thing. You know, when you see something dangerous. And of course, young children and young animals have to be taught about physical danger in the environment. And of course, those of you with young children can relate to this. You're always reminding the children to be careful. Please be careful. Pointing out all the different types of physical dangers. And of course, sometimes children, like young animals, have to learn the hard way. Because sometimes children don't listen. And of course, when they're full of energy, of course, it's not easy sometimes. So they have to get hurt sometimes. And then they learn. But once young children and young animals learn about physical dangers, then it becomes something instinctual. But mental, psychological fear is something much more complicated. Because as we said, we have this thinking process and the sense of I, and that's why we have several types of mental, psychological fear. And a good way of looking at it, at least the model I like to use, is that of a tree. I call it the tree of fear. The various branches are the different types of mental, psychological fears we have. And then there's a connecting branch, or the connecting trunk of the tree. And there are three factors of fear that connects all our mental, psychological fears. And of course, we have the root of the tree of fear. So we'll just go through all the different types of fears that we experience. A very common one is the fear of not being successful. You can all relate to that in the working world. Of course, if you're a student, there's also that fear, right? The fear of not passing your exams, not graduating, and so on. And of course, the fear of not finding a job. And if you want to go to university, there's the fear of not being able to go to university. And with that is also the fear of not living up to your family's expectations. Because, you know, if your family, your parents, they have high expectations of you, you can say you have more of this, what you call family pressure, family expectation. So that the fear of not being successful, naturally the fear of failure. And it's also the fear of not being loved, not being accepted. So there's a fear of rejection. There's also the fear of authority. And in this culture, of course, the fear of ghosts and spirits. And interestingly, the fear of authority and the fear of ghosts and spirits are related. Maybe you can see the connection. That's the fear of authority and the fear of ghosts and spirits. See if you can find the connection. There's also the fear of change, right? One of the fears we have, the fear of change. Another fear, of course, it could be related again to family expectation, and sometimes even peer pressure, say from your friends or your siblings, the fear of not getting married, fear of not, meeting someone, fear of not getting married, and of course the fear of not having a family. And there's the fear of loss. We can all relate to that, the fear of loss. And this covers a whole range of subjects. Fear of losing family members, close friends, fear of losing material wealth, fear of losing your job, fear of losing a certain position in society, if you have a certain position, or you have a certain reputation, and the fear of losing that reputation. Another fear we have is the fear of loneliness and isolation. Many people in Western countries have this fear of loneliness and isolation. And of course there's the fear of the unknown, fear of the future. And the fear of sickness, aging, and death. And as we said last week, with the fear of death is the fear of the unknown. We spoke about that. And that's why we ask that question, what happens to me when I die, and where do I go after death? Because as we said last week, the fear of death and the unknown is the great mystery. But if we can investigate, we're able to overcome this fear. Because it's from this fear of the unknown that we create many beliefs in an afterlife. Because it gives us great comfort to have this belief. And if you're not able to overcome this fear, then having such a belief is very, very comforting. And you have that freedom to believe whatever you want to believe, as long as you don't hurt others, or you impose that belief on others. Of course, there's the fear of public opinion, right? What people are saying about us, or might say. And even the fear of what people are thinking about us. As if you can stop people from thinking, or stop people from talking. So that's a fear that it's good to overcome, because you can never stop people from talking and thinking. And for some people, especially monastics, there's a fear of not becoming enlightened, fear of not becoming an arahant. I have met some monastics, especially Western monastics, because they still have a strong attachment to self. And the self is never patient. So they want to achieve enlightenment or to become an arahant as soon as possible. And there's a fear of that's related to guilt. I think we mentioned this before. Because guilt is an aspect of fear. And of course the fear of pain, either physical pain or emotional pain. So that is more or less the main fears we have. And of course you have other fears like, fear of, closed spaces, claustrophobia, right? And there's that rare fear, which is the opposite of claustrophobia, the fear of open space. Maybe you've heard about that. Now, I don't think anyone in Malaysia has that fear. But in the West, some people have this fear, the fear of open space. So they're afraid to go outside their house. They become almost like prisoners inside their house. It's quite interesting. And people have to, bring food for them, or have food delivered, like groceries and so on, delivered to them. They're just so afraid to go outside. And they have little fears, like the fears of rats and mice, fear of cockroaches, fear of animal fur and feather. Some people, they have feathers, they have this fear. 4 years ago when I was invited for the first time to this one center in Singapore, and I flew directly from Canada via Korea, I think. When they took me to the center and the guest room, I saw 2 large cockroaches. And believe it or not, I was very happy to see them. They were like old friends. Because I grew up with cockroaches in the tropics. And in Canada, you rarely see cockroaches. So when I saw these 2 cockroaches, it was like, having a reunion with old friends. Didn't bother me in the least. No aversion. But I think most Singaporeans would have, screamed. Or want to, spray insecticide. Well, the amazing thing about cockroaches, if you care to reflect on them, they are living fossils. Do you understand? Living fossils. They've been around for millions and millions of years, even before early humans. That's right. They've been around a very long time. So you should respect them. Show them some kindness and compassion. Now, the fears we have concerning the future, about not being successful and so on, not achieving, I think two of the main causes is not only family expectation, but also the habit of comparing, when we compare ourselves with others. And maybe your parents compare you to your siblings, who are more successful, and you're starting out in life in the professional world, or they compare you to your cousins, like this. So that adds some pressure to achieve, to prove yourself. I was very fortunate that I had parents who were not like that. They never pressured me. All they said was, try to do your best. Try to do your best. And when I look back, I see how healthy, how beneficial that was. Because when I'm in Singapore, I meet, and of course I read about parents who put so much pressure on their children. It's very, very unhealthy. Because they're also caught up in the delusion and anxiety. And when they put all this pressure on the children, they think they're doing the right thing, but they're not. And this is why there's a very wise saying, you might have heard it. It says, the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. I don't know if you've heard that. The road to hell is often paved with good intentions. It's very true when you reflect on it. People have good intentions, they mean well, but because they are anxious, they have all this fear, anxiety, worry, and they end up causing more harm than good, and they don't realize it. And what I see in Singapore is only when the children, have a nervous breakdown and they end up in the hospital, only then the parents realize that there's something wrong. And the children who jump from high rises, it's too late. But at least the ones who end up in hospitals, have a chance to recover. It's very sad. And the children, when they come from school, they have to attend so many tuition classes and other activities too. So they don't have time to be children, even to relax. So much pressure. So when I'm in Singapore, I'm very outspoken. And if I happen to meet parents like that in Malaysia, I'll be very direct with them. That what they're not doing is healthy. And that reminds me of a story. Once I met this student at the Dharma camp. And he was an A student, very bright. But not only academically, he had a lot of common sense. And he told me that every time he had to study for an exam, he had so much anxiety. So I said, but you're a very good student, why would you be so anxious? He said, you see, I'm not the problem, it's my parents. They're both high school teachers. And since he was very young, he was always at the top of the class. And of course, that made them very proud. They could always say, my son is, number one. And the last 2 years, he came second or third, but still with A average, high average. But his parents were not pleased, because their son had to be number one. And you think that, these are school teachers, they would know better. Totally deluded and stupid parents. Because it's really their pride, right? It's not about their son. What we call conditional love. It's not unconditional. The ego. So I said to him, I really want to meet your parents, and I'm prepared to give them a good scolding, because I felt they deserved it. And he became a little nervous, and he said, it's okay, Bhante, I'll speak with them. And I said, don't worry, I don't live in this country. I'll scold them and take off. Yeah, they can't reach me in Canada. But as I said, he was very intelligent, so I said, yes, please talk to them. What they're doing is nonsense. It's all the ego. It's not unconditional love. And of course, there are sometimes, somebody doesn't want to get married. Because the truth is, marriage is not for everyone. So remember that, if you have children and you're expecting them to get married, it's not for everyone. And look at the high divorce rate too, right? I think it might be growing in Malaysia. But in the West, it's, most places it's about 50% divorce. And some places even higher, 60% divorce. Actually, I have a good friend in Malacca. He never wanted to get married, which is like being single. But his mother kept nagging him every day. And he wasn't strong enough to say, look, Mom, it's my life, please. Go to the temple and do some chanting and deal with your anxiety. He wasn't strong enough. So he got married just to please her. Big mistake. And it just so happened that his wife couldn't get along with the mother. So finally the mother realized she had made a mistake, nagging him, forcing him to get married. Again, anxiety, craving, delusion. Fear of change. That comes from, strong attachment. And also, it's a lack of understanding that we exist because of change. As I mentioned before, we're actually a process of body and mind. Rupa and Dhamma. So we're alive because of change. But we tend to overlook this fact. And so because of personal craving and clinging, we don't want certain things to change, certain situations, certain people, and of course material things that we're very attached to. So this is why it's good to remind ourselves that we're alive because of change. And as you know, anyone or anything that we're attached to, we want those things or those people to be permanent. Because we think that, I am permanent, so whatever I'm attached to should be permanent. So that attachment, of course, is not based on wisdom, based on understanding. And as you know, if you don't like someone, or that somebody has, been very unpleasant to you or done you harm in some way, you don't care if they are impermanent, right? If they have a heart attack, drop dead, thank God. Good riddance. It's a fact. Or as somebody said, if they get kidnapped by aliens and taken to another solar system very far away, yes, good riddance. Very interesting. And there's a classic example of, say you have an old car It has a few scratches and bumps. And you're thinking of buying a new car or maybe even a second-hand car. So if it gets another scratch, another bump, it's an old car, it's okay. But think of it, a brand new car. You just bought a brand new car. And the slightest scratch on that brand new car, big suffering, right? And if a bird flies over and drops a blessing on your new car, you want to kill that bird. It's just a fact of life. And of course, if you listen to the news every day, you hear people are dying all the time. But if you don't know them, there's not much, suffering. You just said, oh well, too bad, that's life. But because you don't know them, there's no personal attachment, we're not so affected by them. I once had the experience of a close friend of mine from university. He died in this accident. And it was just so unbelievable to hear his death being announced on the radio. Because it's something you don't expect. To hear somebody that you know very well, his death announcement on the radio. It was, you couldn't believe it, like a dream. Can't believe it's true. The fear of not being loved and accepted, that includes the fear of rejection. Of course, as young children, as you know, if children don't get enough love and attention, they suffer a great deal from this. They feel very insecure. And sadly, there are many children who grow up without proper love, proper affection, proper care. So they suffer a great deal. They grow up to be damaged adults. But I think as an adult, if you still have this fear, then it means that one is lacking in self-understanding, which is what Dharma is. The Dharma and the practice is really learning about ourselves, who we really are at a deeper level. And if we are very attached to I, this feeling of I, then this I will have a lot of insecurity. And when you're not sure about yourself, and part of it comes from, again, this habit of comparing yourself with others. Because when you compare yourself with others, you'll always have a conflict in the mind. And you feel, you're just not good enough. That feeling. They call it low self-esteem. Yeah. You're never good enough when you compare yourself. And that creates conflict in the mind. So that's one of the factors of fear, is when we compare ourselves to others. It's not very healthy. On rare occasions, somebody will feel superior. But most people will feel inferior. You're not as good as. So when I'm speaking with students, I speak about this. That when you compare yourself to other students, it's it's a no-win situation. Because you'll always find students who are smarter than you are, or brighter. They can get higher marks. Or students who are more popular than you are, and they have more friends than you are. Or they are better looking. And of course, you always find students whose parents have more money than your parents. So this is why it's a no-win situation. And also when you compare yourself to others, then naturally a craving arises in the mind. You want to be, as successful as the other person. Or you want to be as popular. Or if you're into fashion, you'd like to wear those, beautiful, expensive clothes. And as we said before, when we have this craving in our minds that we have to achieve, and unfortunately, most of our cultures now, we tend to worship success. And it's actually unhealthy. Of course, you try to do your best, but when you're in a culture that worships success, you see that there's a lot of anxiety, even depression. And Korea is a good example, and Japan. Korea has a high suicide rate because they only see success in terms of material success. So if they can't live up to that high standard of achieving, of course they get depressed, and in Japan, I don't know if you know, in Japan there's it's on YouTube, and there's even a Japanese term. It's young professionals, and of course they're trying to achieve, trying to be successful, but they can't. And they feel depressed, and they drop out of society, and they end up just staying home. They just can't deal with the pressure, that fast pressure. And all they do is just, internet videos, and so on. They retreat from the normal society. And there are a few people who are very compassionate, and they try to get them together and try to cure them or to heal them of this sense of failure, that you're failing. And of course, when these therapists get these people together, it's very therapeutic because they realize they're not the only ones. Because when you feel like a failure, you think you're the only person. You're the only person. But of course, it's not true. There are many people who are experiencing the very same thing. So there's, at least, with the Dhamma, you begin to see that there's much more to life than material success. Of course, we need some material success, but it's not the only thing. We need a balance. And I see this in North America. There are many successful people, but they are very insecure because they don't have the Dharma. They're very insecure because they're clinging to the sense of ego, that this ego is permanent. So it's a lack of wisdom, a lack of self-knowledge. And when you're insecure, it doesn't matter how much you have, it's just never enough. It's never enough when you're insecure. Just like when you're clinging to certain beliefs, and although that belief might give you some sense of comfort or security, but if it's just clinging to an idea, and there's no wisdom, out of that security, you also want to convert others to your belief. Because you're not secure. And that's the nature of insecurity. So wisdom is something very different, as I mentioned, different from just believing something. And also when we have the sense of I, when we cling strongly to the sense of I, then naturally we have an image of ourselves, whether it's positive or negative. And this is why many people suffer from guilt. So I've said before, when we make mistakes, it's important that we forgive ourselves for being human, because we're not perfect. No one is. And we all make mistakes. But because we're conditioned with this judgmental mind, we judge ourselves very harshly. Just like when we have conflicts with others, we judge them, and we put negative images on other people. So likewise, we judge ourselves, we blame ourselves, and we have negative images of ourselves. And that's why guilt is related to fear, because of that negative image. And of course, what are people going to think of me, right? Because I've been so stupid, I've been so bad. And of course, you worry about karma, I've created all this bad karma because I've made this mistake. So next rebirth is going to be very bad. And if you're a Christian, of course, you're going to be punished, right, by God. Or you're going to go straight to hell. So that creates fear, doesn't it? Anxiety. So this is why the practice of loving kindness is so important when we're suffering from guilt. Because we replace those negative, judgmental thoughts with kind, positive thoughts. So remember that. But it's a part of the mind. Not only do we cling to the idea of self, but we create all these images of ourselves, whether it's negative or positive. And if it happens to be positive, we try to protect that image. And because we try to protect this image, we have the fear of public opinion, right? What people are saying or thinking about us. So the question is it possible not to have an image of yourself? Whether it's positive or negative, is that possible? It simply means to live with more awareness. Because when we live without awareness, you begin to see that state of awareness, that knowing, intuitive knowing in the present moment, is really who we are. Or Buddha nature, or you can say the Buddha mind. And this is the real meaning of taking refuge in the Buddha. You have the ceremonial taking refuge, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. That is only, ceremonial taking refuge. But the real refuge that comes from practice, from wisdom, is to understand this. When you begin to trust and rest in this present moment awareness and knowing, or wisdom mind. So when we have that, we don't cling to an image. And therefore we don't have that fear of public opinion. So what people say or think about us, it's not important. Only blah, blah, blah. And of course, you can't stop people from talking or thinking. And you get to a point in your life too, is that you can't please everyone. You could be the nicest, kindest person on this planet, but you'll always find, a few people who just don't like you. That's just the way life is. That's why the Buddha spoke about the 8 worldly conditions, right? Praise and blame, happiness, unhappiness, pain, pleasure, gain and loss. Only temporary conditions. It's like some people can appreciate what I'm teaching, and some people just can't. But that's life. And in the Buddha's time, of course, many people couldn't understand it. But the Buddha, because he was so radical, he said, well, if you don't understand, that's okay, you go to another teacher. Because he never wanted converts, you know. He didn't want to convert people. He said, see the Dhamma. Awaken yourself from delusion. Free the mind of dukkha. Very radical way of teaching. And if somebody couldn't understand a certain teaching, he said, well, try something else. If it's beneficial, you use it, and if it's not beneficial, you try something else. A very skillful teacher. Very skillful. Because you just can't impose, you know, one thing or the other on people. If they can't understand, they can't understand. The fear of authority and the fear of ghosts and spirits. Have you seen the connection? I know you haven't had much time to reflect on this. Actually, I should give you this as a homework. Then you have more time to reflect and see the connection between those two fears. It has to do with childhood. It's childhood conditioning. Right? So if you've had strict parents, or one parent is very strict, that's where it starts, you know, the fear of authority. And of course, if that one strict parent or both parents, you know, if they punish you, right, it's natural to have that fear. And you go to school, that fear continues, you know, fear of the teacher or fear of the headmaster, the principal. In my elementary school, all teachers were allowed to beat. So naturally, you're afraid, you know, of the strap. But in high school, only the headmaster was allowed to beat, or cane, the cane from the British time. And of course, you carry that fear in the work environment, you know, fear of the boss, right? And in some temples, if the head monk is really, you know, very stern or serious, there's a fear of the head monk. But it's a childhood conditioning. Same with ghosts and spirits, right? Same thing. So have you ever asked yourself, why do we believe in ghosts and spirits? Or why have human beings created ghosts and spirits? Because it's all created in the mind. But you can understand. It has to do with the fear of the unknown. You know, when somebody passes away and you really don't understand, you wonder, where has this person gone to, right? What has happened to this person? Where's the life force? Of course, an easy way of explaining, they have become spirits. They become invisible beings. And of course, your imagination takes over, right? And you believe ghosts and spirits, they live in the spirit world. Except at Hungry Ghost Month, right? Then they come back and you have to feed them. And you have to entertain them too. Yeah, I was in Singapore once during the Hungry Ghost Month. I had a great time. I love to observe all these things, you know, just from a cultural perspective. And you know, they have the giant incense that they make, the special ones, with the dragons around them, and they can burn for 3-4 days. And the reason why you need all that incense smoke, because they believe that when you give offerings to the hungry ghost, that the smoke takes the essence of the offerings into the spirit world. Actually, I shouldn't be teaching you all this because I don't believe it. But I still find it fascinating, just culturally. And I enjoyed all the entertainment, you know. Classical Chinese music, the puppet shows, and the opera, the Beijing or Cantonese opera. Just love it. And of course, the fear of sickness, aging, and death we mentioned before. It has to do with not understanding the true nature of the body. So normally we identify with the body, don't we? This is me, this is mine. And we see sickness, as something personal. Just like aging, I'm sick or I'm growing old, and of course I'm going to die. So there's that fear. But when you understand that the body belongs to nature, the changing conditions of nature, it is non-self, then we can be at peace. We can be at peace with these changes. Because we no longer identify with them. We just see sickness, aging, and death, just like hunger and tiredness, as just bodily changes. It's nature. It's not me, it's not mine. But when we cling to them, of course, the mind becomes anxious, worried. And of course, the unknown, the great unknown. Who was not here at last week's talk? Okay. The fear of pain, whether it's emotional or physical pain, and it has to do with, you remember those experiences, or being sick, or being very sick, or you've been hurt emotionally. So when you remember those painful experiences, naturally, you don't want to repeat those painful experiences. It's very natural. Whereas if we remember anything pleasant, anything happy, naturally we want to repeat those pleasant experiences. It's interesting because we can't hold on to these experiences. And you know that from experience, right? You can't hold on to a happy feeling or anything that feels good. But the mind holds on to it as memory. And so when we remember something very pleasurable, very happy, naturally, we want to repeat it. Whereas when we remember something very painful, whether it's physical or emotional, naturally, we don't want to repeat the painful experience, hence the fear of pain. And we mentioned last week that one of the reasons why death is the great unknown, or when we worry too much about the future, which is the unknown, we naturally experience anxiety. And we said last week that the main reason why death is such a great mystery and the unknown is that our thinking mind cannot relate to the unknown. Because our thinking is based on that which we know. From memory, past experience, knowledge, information. That is why it is so important to understand this. Memory, past experience, knowledge, information. And when you reflect on this, you see this more clearly. It is so obvious. That every time we think, we are responding to these things. And of course, our thinking mind comes upon the great unknown. And it cannot relate. Because thinking is based on that which we know. And we used that example last week. It's like a fish trying to relate to the experience of riding a bicycle. It cannot relate to that experience, right? Or driving a car or using internet. A fish cannot relate to those experiences. So likewise, our thinking mind, or thinking consciousness cannot relate to the unknown, which is death. And so there's fear. And this is why when most people first see a dead body, we usually say, that person looks so peaceful, like they're sleeping. You know, most people will say that. They look so peaceful, like they're sleeping. And the reason why we say that is because we can relate to somebody, you know, lying there as being asleep, peaceful. But what most of us can't really relate to is that for that body that we see is no longer a human being. It is totally lifeless. In my country we say dead, dead, dead. You know, no energy, no thoughts, no emotions, no memories, feeling, all those things. Most of us can't relate to that. But you know, if you speak to, you know, medical people, people who are dealing with dead bodies on a daily basis, people who work in, you know, medical people who work in funeral homes, they will tell you it's very normal. Because for them it's a daily experience. You know, they get used to it. But for most of us, it is the unknown. And this is why most of us, you know, would never, or we wouldn't be brave enough to spend even 5 minutes alone with a dead body in a room. Just alone, just you alone with a dead body. Or maybe if you knew the person really well, you know, like a really close family member, maybe you'd be brave enough. But is that fear, isn't it? The fear of the unknown. And sometimes you read these stories about medical people, you know, say they're taking a dead body down to the morgue, and they're in an elevator with a dead body, and they're all alone in the elevator, and suddenly the dead body sits up. Ooh, surprise, surprise, surprise. It happens sometimes. Or they belch, you know, or they pass gas or something. Right? Very scary. You can understand. The great unknown. And so because we can't relate, our thinking mind cannot relate to the unknown, we project. Our thinking mind projects itself beyond death. And it says, of course, I will continue after death. And this is why we get some form of comfort when we project beyond death. And we say, you know, we'll continue somehow after death. It's very comforting. But it is thinking that is afraid to come to an end. When you look at all the different beliefs, and there are many beliefs, believe me, many different beliefs. And reincarnation, rebirth is only one belief. There are many, many beliefs. But when you examine all those beliefs, you see that it is thinking itself. This movement from past to future. It's afraid to come to an end. And this is why in meditation, when you allow the mind to be silent, when you allow thinking to be silent, to stop by itself, in that silence, that stillness is the unknown. The absence of thought, of thinking. And when you understand it and you experience it, there is no fear of the unknown. Because you experience the state as something very peaceful, and it is timeless. No past, no future. And that's why when you practice and your mind becomes very calm, very silent, you cannot, that experience is beyond value, right? It's beyond value. So even for half an hour, it's very beneficial when you can experience it, even for half an hour in your busy lives. To be free of that time, that feeling of time, past and future. Because time is one of the factors of fear and anxiety and stress. You know that, right? Time is one of the factors of stress. Or stress is time related. There's so much to do and of course so little time. And you notice, when we think too much about the future, fear is there, right? Anxiety, fear, anxiety, worry. So you see how time is a factor. Just like when we regret the past, then we have all these regrets and then guilt. How time is one of the factors of fear, past and future, and of course thinking. Thinking is the main cause of fear. So you can say the trunk of the tree of fear are these three factors. The main factor is thinking, which is obvious, and then thinking related to time as past and future. And the third factor is desire, craving. Any type of wanting, needing, that always creates fear. The fear of not, achieving, not getting what we want. It's a very good reflection, these factors of fear. And then we get to the very root of fear. The very root of fear. Yes, I didn't mention the fear of loss. We can all relate to that, right? Fear of loss. And this fear has to do with dependency. Now, there are two types of dependency, two. One is physical dependency and one is emotional dependency. Now, as human beings, it is natural to depend on each other physically. We can help each other, but we need help. But emotional dependency is something different. It's like you have to physically depend on the mailman, the postman, to deliver your letters or to deliver something. But to be emotionally attached to, say, the mailman or the deliverer man, of course, is something different. So why do we depend emotionally on somebody or something? And in some cases, it's animals. Some people become very emotionally attached to animals. And I've seen people in the West, sometimes they're more emotionally attached to animals than to people. Because one positive thing about having pets is that they don't judge you. It's one of the main reasons why pets are so attractive. They don't judge you. They know about unconditional love, right? But as you know, humans, we're very quick to judge, right? like we judge ourselves. That's why we have guilt. So emotional dependency has to do with, again, a lack of understanding, a lack of practice. And when we don't understand ourselves, the mind reaches out and it wants to hold on to something or somebody. And of course, when there's emotional dependency, there is expectation, and when expectations are not met, there is frustration, disappointment, resentment, even anger sometimes. So this is something that we can reflect on. If you find yourself being too emotionally attached, say to somebody, even your children, or to some material thing or whatever, just reflect on it. Why am I so dependent? Why am I so attached to this person emotionally? And you find again, when we practice and we're more peaceful within ourselves, you find that you have less attachment. Emotional attachment. Because you're not depending so much on someone or something for your happiness. And I think that's one of the big problems people have in marriages. Where you marry this person, your soulmate, and you believe this person is going to make me happy. Because in the end, no one can make you happy but yourself. This is why it's important to learn how to be your best friend and learn the truth of aloneness. There's a difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness comes, again, because we don't understand ourselves, our mind are always agitated, very reactive. So quickly we feel lonely. We're depending on somebody or something, to keep us company. And now, of course, people are beginning to need humans or other people less and less, because now their best friend is the smartphone. The smartphone has everything, right? Well, then there's the fear of losing your smartphone. Uh-oh, big trouble. So what is the root of fear? The tree. We talk about the factors of fear, and we have the root, the tree. What is the root of it? No, thinking is the main factor, obviously, if it's mental, psychological. Thinking, time, desire, craving. But what is the very root? We've been talking about it.
Insecurity.
What is causing the insecurity?
Unknown. Self? Yeah.
The self, yes. Of course, the self, the I, the me. Yeah, the ego, the self. Yeah. That's right. But of course, the self is created by thinking. It's all thinking. Memory, future plans. It is the self. So this is why we have to understand the self. And you see that as well, the Buddha realized it's not something permanent, not something which is separate, independent from the rest of nature. But when we're trapped in thinking, without awareness, of course, the I feels separate. And that's why we ask that question. What happens to me when I die, and where do I go after death? Because the I feels separate. It doesn't feel connected, right, to anything. So the I is seeking, security, some form of security. And as we mentioned before, the language, when we're caught in language and thinking, it's very misleading. Because the I feels separate. And we spoke about that statement. I came into this world, or we came into this world. When you look at that statement more closely, I came into this world, we came into this world. If you look at it more closely, it implies that we came from somewhere else. Another solar system. And we landed here, and we're like outsiders, we're aliens. You see that? It's the illusion of language. Just like when you say, where do I go after I die? I feel separate. But in truth, we didn't come into the world as aliens or outsiders from somewhere else, but rather we came out of the world. Like leaves from a tree, like flowers, fruits from trees. You see the difference? We came out of the world, composed of elements and energy. We are truly earthlings, and the true meaning of that word earthling, just like a seedling, a little plant that sprouts from a seed. We are earthlings. We came out of the earth. We didn't come into it. It's the illusion of language. When you contemplate, you begin to realize we are aspects of the planet in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. We are aspects of the planet in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. Or on a more cosmic scale, we are aspects of the universe in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. So when you understand that, you realize that there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. The I, the seemingly separate I that wants to know, where does it go? It's just thinking. It's just thinking. It's a label. So when we experience, as we said, that silence of the mind, and we understand it is the unknown, there is no fear of the unknown. And that question does not arise. You know that question? Yeah. What happens to me when I die, and where do I go after that? It does not arise. So that's just thinking. The illusion of thinking. There's a reflection that we do sometimes. It's the body elements reflection. I don't know if we have time for it, but it's a good reflection. Because when we first read or hear about the elements, earth, water, heat, air, space, and consciousness, it's only a concept, just an idea. But when you take the time to see certain parts of the body, you don't need to go through all the 32 body parts. You begin to see what elements are involved, and then the truth of the elements becomes more clear. It's no longer a concept, an idea. For example, when you just feel your hair, the hair on your head. Feel the hair on your head, feel it. What element is involved? Earth, yes, earth element. Just like your nails, feel your fingernails, right? That hard quality, that's also earth. And for the hair on the nails to grow, the water element is involved. Now feel the bones in your fingers, all the hard bones. And just feel the bone in your knees, because you have bigger bones there in your knee, right? What do we have? We have calcium, magnesium, which is earth element. And inside you have water, you have heat element. Now run your tongue over your teeth. Right? You feel teeth, right? Calcium, magnesium, earth element. And inside the teeth, the gums, you have water, you have heat. Okay? And you just feel the wetness in the mouth. That's water. Now think of tears. Your tears, water, right? Have you ever tasted your tears? What does it taste like? Salt, right? And what element is salt? Earth is earth element. It's not hard, but it's dissolved. So it's earth element. Just like sweat, perspiration, right? You have water, and if you taste your sweat, perspiration, there's salt. Again, earth. And when we reflect on urine, which is part of our daily experience, same thing. Water, and you have salt and all the minerals. And if urine is fresh, it feels warm, right? Heat element. And then we come to blood. That's a very good one, blood. You have water. Then you have salt, other minerals, earth and iron. So earth element is very prominent in blood. And you have heat, and the air element is also prominent because you have oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. And the body has to keep always breathing. So the earth element and the air element is very prominent in blood. And when we breathe mindfully, you can experience the air element directly, right? When you breathe. And also the element of space. When you feel your lungs expanding, contracting, you have space. Now just feel the back of your hand. You have water, earth, heat. Also air element is there too. And the reason why we have heat element is because, again, we're a process, right? Body and mind. It's always working because it produces heat, metabolism. And that's why when we have physical activity, physical exercise, we feel warmer. And when we rest, we cool down. And as you know, the body perspires as a natural way of cooling itself down. And below the skin, you have, flesh, sinew, muscles, so many things there. And of course, internal organs. So the four elements are there. Earth, water, heat, air. And then we have the element of space. Because you have space inside the body and space outside the body. And without space, nothing could exist. Without space. So we have space first in the mouth cavity. When you go home, you can stand in front of the mirror and you can open your mouth. You see big space there. There's space in the esophagus or the windpipe, space in the lungs, as we said, that you can experience directly. There's space in the stomach, the intestines. You have space in the ear cavity, which allows sound vibration and hearing consciousness. Space in the nostrils, which allow breathing, in-breath, out-breath to take place. So there's a lot of space there. And we are sitting in the space of this room. If this room was, say, filled with boxes from floor to ceiling, we wouldn't be able to sit here, right? And you can say that the distance between, say, Mahavihara and where Central Station, there is space. And there's larger space between, say, Mahavihara and where? PJ, maybe PJ. And larger space between, say, KL and Singapore. And larger space between KL and, say, Jakarta. And then there's larger space between planet Earth and the Sun. Or planet Earth and the other planets in the solar system. And there's even vaster space between the Sun and just the closest stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And there's immense space between the Milky Way galaxy and just the neighboring galaxies. Immense space. And of course in meditation, when the mind becomes quiet, you see that there's the experience of spacious awareness. The mind becomes more spacious when the mind is quiet. Because awareness by nature is spacious. So if the mind is always thinking, preoccupied, there's no space in the mind. So the mind doesn't feel relaxed, it doesn't feel calm. Now, when these elements come together to form a human body, we say it is male or female. And we give it names so that we can identify each other more easily. This is our human convention, human world. But when we look deeply, you see there's no one there, no permanent I, no self. There's only the body-mind process, only earth, water, heat, air, and space. Only body-mind process, only earth, water, heat, air, and space. And then we come to the sixth element, the element of consciousness. And consciousness is considered an element because without consciousness, we wouldn't be aware of life through the senses, and we wouldn't be aware of the other five elements. So this is a reflection on the body and the elements. And the more you do this reflection, then the truth of the elements becomes more clear. Something more intimate is no longer a concept. It's a reality. And you begin to understand that we exist because of these elements. And you get to a stage where you realize we're just a collection of elements pretending to be people. That's right. And this collection who's sitting up here speaking is pretending to be Bhante Kovida from Canada. It's only pretending when you think of it. And of course your collection of elements is pretending to be who you think you are, but it's only pretending. And as I said, if you really want to know what continues after death, which is the 1 million ringgit question, it's the elements. They go back to nature. That's right, they go back to nature. There's no I, just elements. This is why I mentioned before that if you touch a dead body, what you notice is that a dead body feels cold. So the heat element is the first element to leave the body. Huh? Yeah, that's right. Because everything shuts down. Body-mind process shuts down. So no more heat, no more metabolism, and therefore no more heat. It's a very profound but very wonderful reflection, because it's reality, it's real. And as you know, earth, ashes, bones are earth, right? Earth element. And on a deeper level than the elements, we have atoms. Atoms. Otherwise known as cosmic energy. Because everything is composed of atoms. Everything. So on that level, on that deep reflection of atoms and energy, you may recall the first law of science that you learned in high school. You remember that one? Energy cannot be created or destroyed. You remember that? It can only change its form, and it can move from one place to another. So on that very profound level of energy, if you contemplate, one is able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. That's right. Very profound. No birth, no death, just energy. Or another model you can use is the surface of the ocean. The waves rise and fall, rise and fall. Waves are not separate from the ocean. Likewise, we are not separate from the elements and the energy of the planet and the solar system. So when we can reflect on this, it helps us not to have less, fear, worry, anxiety, and so on. But if we're still trapped in thinking, and the I, which is created by thinking, will still be asking that question, where do I go when I die, and what happens to me? And there'll be fear of the unknown, fear of the unknown. I think one of the fears we have regarding death is because of our attachments. Because as we go through life, we accumulate more and more attachments. Not only physical attachments, but also, psychological attachments. And as we said, when we practice, then we're able to overcome the fear of loneliness and isolation. And then we we understand aloneness, which is different from loneliness. Aloneness. Because the truth is we are alone. Aloneness is really our true nature. You know the saying, we are born alone and we're going to die alone. It's just a fact. And if you're hungry, nobody can eat for you. Okay? Even if your best friend or your partner offers to eat for you. Never mind, you sit there, I'll eat for you. It doesn't work that way, right? Like going to the toilet. Nobody can go for you. It's just a fact. Just like when you're hungry or when you're tired, nobody can rest for you. Even if they offer. It doesn't work that way. It's just a natural fact. We are alone. But we try to escape that fact of aloneness, through our conditioning. And by escaping from that fact of aloneness, we become lonely. We feel, isolated. Because of the mind, we're deluded by the restless, reactive mind. And you begin to see, when we reflect on the human condition, you see how vulnerable we are. We're very vulnerable. Because we have all these fears, anxieties, worries, frustrations. And of course, physically, there's the fact of, sickness, aging, and death. Very vulnerable. And this is why compassion is so important. The practice of loving kindness and compassion. There's a very beautiful saying in Tibet. It says, when we're born, we cry. But the world rejoices. People are happy. And when we die, the world cries. But we may attain the great liberation. Freedom from suffering. There's another poem, and whenever I'm asked to say something at a funeral or a memorial service, I like to quote this poem. It's by Khalil Gibran. He was a Christian mystic from Lebanon, Middle East. And this poem is from his well-known book called The Prophet. And I usually quote it twice because of it is so profound, so beautiful. For what is it to die, but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing, but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered, without hindrance? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance. For life and death are one, as the oceans and rivers are one. For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance. For life and death are one, as the oceans and rivers are one. Amazing when you think of it. Amazing writer. Are there any questions? I don't know, after such a profound poem, I can't imagine a question. Yes.
It may not be a question, but I just want to verify some point. There's one part where Bhante you mentioned about power and authority.
The fear of authority.
Yes.
Yes.
So what has happened to us at this current juncture? Have we lost our ability to investigate, examine, and liberate ourselves? Or are we like caught on to a raft or clinging to a knee and expecting the Sangha to actually play that role in the job? This question which I would like to bring up is about faith. If we look at the Buddha Dhamma, the Buddha establishes faith only when you become a Sattva. Only when you actually walk into the streams of, as a stream emperor, is when faith is established in the path of practice. When else, what we are here, we are just worshippers and devotees, which sometimes we come from Buddhism, maybe sometimes we go to Christianity, maybe then we look to Islam. So you see that we are actually brought up in a tradition and culture which is confusing and further away from the Dhamma.
That's right. Yeah, because of our conditioning, right? We're conditioned. Yeah, we're conditioned with all these mental defilements, and of course all these fears. All these fears are a part of our conditioning.
And the next point is, what is the cause of this conditioning? Stories which we have been told, fear which we have been exhibited with, influenced by our parents, society. Because when I investigate the Dhamma and I look into my own practice, I find that the three factors which we actually give up when we actually go into the street is actually rites and rituals or the duality of good and bad. See? The second one is actually wrong views. And the third one is actually discursive thinking, chikicha, in terms of skepticism. So in whichever way we are looking, are we geared towards liberation or are we just happy to come back again and again?
And I think partly too is that we're not taught in school to understand thinking. We're only taught subjects, right? I have to study hard to pass exams, to achieve, and so on. We're not taught thinking. And yet we're thinking all the time. So this is why one of the questions that concerned me was thinking. What is thinking? And of course I saw, when all this thinking was creating so much mental, emotional turmoil, I started to ask, is it possible for all this to stop? But there was nobody at the time, to explain. And I didn't have any books. The only book I had was the Bible. And by then I realized I was not going to find, what I'm looking for in the Bible. To me it was just words, ideas, concepts. I wanted experience, direct experience, and of course the Dhamma. So I had to go all the way to India. And then when this profound teacher who gave me the insight, the first person to give the insight into what thinking is, I was just so amazed how it was coming from memory, past experience, knowledge, information. And when you observe your mind, you see that. And how it projects in the future. How it is moving in time, past the future, past the future. And it's so simple, isn't it? It's not rocket science, as we like to say. It's not rocket. It's so simple when you look at it. And all our minds do that. All our thinking does the same thing, past the future. And it doesn't matter what language, right, we think. It's the same thought process. And the I, the conditioning of I, is a part of that movement in time. And you see how we're related to memory, past experience, history, and of course future plans. We project that in the future. That is the conditioning. So I think part of it too is that it is lack of say important education. Something so basic as thinking. And you begin to understand that yes, we need thinking in daily life, but thinking is what causes most of our dukkha, right? Suffering, anxiety, fear, all this craving is all thinking. We're deluded by thinking, by too much thinking, too much mental activity. And the awakening is the present moment, or Buddha nature, the Buddha nature. Because you know, when we identify with thinking, we believe everything that the mind creates, including worries, fears, anxieties, and so on. And of course, I. Every time the mind says I, we think this I is who we are. And what the Buddha realized was the I was just a thought, it was just a social label. And who he really was that awareness, the knowing that can see the impermanent nature of thoughts, of mental activity, coming and going. Because this is what neurosis is. When we're trapped in thinking and we're deluded by it. And of course, we're very attached to the I, which is created by thinking, the social label. And this is why somebody who's very neurotic, of course, is very deluded, very anxious, very fearful, and of course, very insecure. And it needs constant praise, because it's insecure. And in the teaching of the 8 worldly conditions, when we're very attached to praise, to flattery, naturally we are afraid of blame, criticism, and so on. Just like if we are very attached to gain, always wanting, just gaining more and more, naturally we are afraid of loss. So how do we deal with fear when fear arises? We apply mindfulness and we objectify the fear. We don't identify with it. Instead of saying I'm afraid or I'm scared, we say there is a state of fear, or there is fear. Likewise, there is anger, or there is upset, or there is frustration. Not I am angry, or I am upset, or I am frustrated. This is the miracle of mindfulness, because it's a state of non-duality, and it gives us the ability to see things as they are, see things objectively instead of identifying with it, grasping at it. We know it is impermanent. This too shall pass. And we come back to present moment awareness and we allow that mental state to go away. So there's no struggle, no control, or suppression. And another way that is taught by Thich Nhat Hanh is to mindfully breathe and smile at the fear. Breathing in, I know there's fear in me. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing in, I know there's upset in me. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing in, I know there's stress in me. Breathing out, I smile. Breathing in, I know there's desire in me. Breathing out, I smile. It's a very good practice. It's a smile of metta, loving kindness. Because you're not judging it, right? You're not judging it, so there's no conflict. You accept it is there with metta, and you know it is impermanent and it goes away. A very good practice. Because the smiling, mindful smiling, is a very wholesome state of mind. And you can feel that, right? When you smile or even laugh. It's very positive, it's wholesome. And it helps us to relax, And another way is chanting. Do some chanting. So when we're doing the cemetery meditation, that's one of the practices I suggest. Just chant, and the ghosts will go away. But you see, the power of imagination is very, very strong. That's why I speak about the experiment that I do all the time, and I hope you can do it. When you're alone at night, just say to yourself, no, seriously, try it. It's a very good experiment. Of course, no TV, no internet, no smartphone, right? You're alone, and you say to yourself, there's something in the room. Yeah. And the moment you say that, you get goosebumps. And you feel something, especially behind you. Really. And you swear to God, yeah, ghost, it's come to haunt you. But really, it's the power of the imagination. It is. And then you apply mindfulness. Just be mindful, just observe that. And of course, part of you is tempted to look around, but you're too scared. You try it. It's amazing, the power of the imagination. Huh? You suggest it, and you feel this presence behind you. It's the power of the imagination. I do it all the time, even here, you know where I'm staying? Yeah, I say the same thing. And it's always the same experience. It's right behind me. But I apply mindfulness, and it goes away. So I dare you to try that. I challenge you. No, but it really shows you the power of the imagination. And that's why we believe in ghosts and spirits. Because I like to meditate at night in the cemetery. I find it very peaceful. But I was telling a group of people in Penang about this, and I said, but I have to be careful when I'm in the cemetery because I have one strong craving. And that is, I want to dig up one of the graves. Not a fresh one, an old one. Because I like to see the bones, bones, to reflect on the earth element. But I have to be careful because, it's illegal, right? It's illegal. So after I said this to these people in Penang, I got an email from a lady, and she says, Bhante, you're in luck. Her family have decided to dig up the grave of her grandfather and his 2 wives. And we want to collect the 3 sets of bones, put them in one urn, put it somewhere, and we do offerings. Because, they believe the spirit is there, right? So I thought, great. My lucky karma. But that morning, people asked me to do Qigong. So by the time I got to the cemetery, it was a bit late. Nobody was around. So I thought, oh well, bad luck. Got an email from my friend, and she said, guess what, Bhante, got the 3 graves, and they were fairly close together. Because, you know, this cemetery had a lot of graves. And guess what? No bones. They had all dissolved or disintegrated. It was about 100 years old. It had to do with the condition of the soil. All the, you know, water from the rain, and the soil was acidic, you know, a bit acidic. That's why the bones eventually dissolved. Because, you know, in very dry conditions, you know, bones can last forever. But it's wet, right? All the rain and then acidic soil conditions, and no bones. So I asked her, okay, no bones, so what about the spirits? No problem, la. We just put a plaque up somewhere, right, with the names, and we do offerings to the plaque. Actually, in China, it was even my father's village, the Hakka village, it was a tradition to dig up an old grave, you know, what, 3-4 years after. And you collect the bones and you polish them and you put them in an urn. You put them on a shrine on the hillside, because the hillside is good feng shui, you know about feng shui. And you do offerings to the bones. Yeah. I don't know if they still do that in China. Do they do that in Malaysia? Do you know that ancient practice? And then they would reuse the grave, you know, reuse it. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
You are alone in the forest. Suddenly you meet a tiger. How can you No, you encounter a tiger. How can you
Well, I've never met a tiger, but I had a very close encounter with a cobra snake. You know that story. Some of you know that story. Well, I guess even a tiger, when you meet a tiger, you become very awake. Very alert, that's for sure. What happens next depends on the tiger. Right. How friendly or how, you know, how hungry the tiger is. But there's a very well-known Zen story about being chased by a tiger. You know that one? And you go to a precipice, right? And you climb down a little, you just manage to climb, and you hold onto a twig. There's only a twig there to support your weight. And the tiger is right above you and down, you know, it's long distance. And you're in the present moment. You're facing death, either down or up. And right beside him is a little plant with wild strawberries. And he picked the strawberries, tasted it, and these were the most delicious strawberries he's ever tasted. End of story. That's living in the present moment. Enjoy the strawberries while you can. Yes, I went through a lot of anxiety, you know, worried about the future. just feeling that tension all the time. It wasn't very healthy. And not realizing, all this anxiety was, causing by this always worrying thinking about the future. Yes?
When you mentioned the Singapore story about Singapore and the parents,
Mm-hmm.
and also the American culture, it just happened to be my previous life. I used to work in Singapore and US for all my life.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned that most of our beliefs are conditioned by our childhood and social conditioning,
Mm.
which is really true. So when I was working in Singapore, the condition at that time was, I'm not sure whether you heard of this term, kiasuism. The whole society and belief system was such that you really have to compete in order to survive. The school system is such that I think you will not be able to perform, you'll be moved into a not normal grade, normal class.
Mm-hmm.
You have to progress, otherwise you'll be put into the normal class level as such. And as you progress to high school, your results are good, you'll not be able to go to university.
Mm-hmm.
You'll probably go to technical school or polytechnics. So I think the reward and punishment system is such that you have to be very competitive and perform.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So I guess the parents see a different reality.
Mm.
That's what been taught by the Dhamma. I think they have a different Dhamma.
Mm.
So to them, this is the reality. And
Mm.
this is what the child should do.
Mm.
What a child should not do.
Mm.
So I work in an American firm, also same reality.
Mm.
Even Intel CEO have written a book called Only the Paranoid Survive.
Mm. Mm.
So the system is such that every year the bottom 5% of the employee will be attrition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also you imagine, I think the recruitment is already so tough. But regardless of how it is, the bottom 5% is
Mm-hmm.
so pressure is very high.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I have a friend who works for Intel.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably very philosophical, but he's very smart.
Mm-hmm.
He's a product engineer and he's responsible for yield, which is a percentage of good versus total.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the yield will go up, sometimes the yield will go down.
Mm-hmm.
So the yield go down, the boss will be very excited, but he is not. So what goes up must come down.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Well, this is why now in many countries, I'm sure you have them in Malaysia, you also have technical colleges, right? Because they realize not everyone, can be, doctor, engineer, those high-status jobs. Because there are some students.
But the boss couldn't appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So he cannot survive in an environment like this.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how do you make people see the reality? This is a reality we see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dhamma is a different reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for people working, I think it's very hard to reconcile.
Because I think an important part of education is for a child to find out what he or she loves to do. Because if they find something that they really love to do, they will be happy. And it's not about achieving or being successful. You do something because you love to do it. Interestingly, in North America now, these jobs like plumber, carpentry, electricians, they are some of the highest paying jobs now. That's right. But of course, most parents don't want to say, my son the carpenter, or my son the plumber, or my son the electrician, right? Everybody wants to say my son the doctor, right? Or dentist, or whatever. That's right. But I think that's important, for young people to be encouraged to find what they really love to do. Because if they really love to do something, they will be happy, regardless of status and salary and so on. Just like some people love to be car mechanics, right? They just love to work on cars like this. Or any kind of machine, motorbikes, things like this.
One day,
Yes.
one question. During the jogging time, 5 o'clock something, if I saw some ghosts walking around, what should I do? What is ghost? Ghost. While jogging, while something. When I see some ghost walking around, so what should we do? Just pray, tell him go away, or I saw one of the day I saw.
When I was young at night, I used to see ghosts also. And you think it's real, but after I realized it's in the imagination. It's the power of the imagination. Because from where we live, across the road was the church, Anglican church, and there were graveyards. And my sister, who was very scared, every time she looked across, she swore there were ghosts there. But it's the power of the imagination. Yeah. And when you're young, you like to hear ghost stories, right? Yeah. They're scary, but they're exciting. That's why kids like them. They're exciting, but then you might have a bad dream, right? So I'll end by wishing you all a pleasant evening and good night. May you all be free from fear.